Good to have you with us tonight, folks. Thanks for watching. The effort to smear Trayvon Martin is in full tilt. 1 month after the 17-year-old was killed, police have suddenly released part of their investigation, and sources have leaked other selective information to the media. The city of Sanford, Florida, has posted the initial police reports on its website. In it, one officer describes the shooter, George Zimmerman, this way: "I could observe that his back appeared to be wet and was covered in grass, as if he had been lying on his back on the ground. Zimmerman was also bleeding from his nose and the back of his head." Trayvon Martin obviously cannot defend himself, but George Zimmerman can. According to the Orlando Sentinel newspaper, authorities say Trayvon Martin approached Zimmerman from behind as Zimmerman was walking back to his SUV. They exchanged words, then Trayvon punched him in the nose, sending him to the ground, and began beating him. But the Miami Herald raises many other questions about the police investigation. One of the witnesses who heard the crying said she called a detective repeatedly, but said he was not interested because her account differed from that of Zimmerman's. Trayvon's parents obviously dispute this and believe it is all part of character assassination of their son.
Even in death, they are still disrespecting my son.
The only comment that I have right now is that they've killed my son, and now they're trying to kill his reputation.
Information about Trayvon's suspension from school was also leaked. He was suspended because traces of marijuana were found in a plastic baggie in a book bag. The family attorney responded to that.
Whatever Trayvon Martin was suspended for had absolutely no bearing on what happened on the night of February 26th. If he and his friends experimented with marijuana, that is still completely irrelevant to George Zimmerman killing their son on the night of February 26th. Once again, law enforcement is attempting to demonize and blame the victim by releasing bits and pieces of their ongoing investigation.
A friend of George Zimmerman, Joe Oliver, has also been making the rounds. He says he wants to defuse the situation. Here is what he said about Zimmerman's alleged racial slur in the 911 tape.
To me, it's a matter of interpretation of whether he's saying coon or goon. There are a lot of parts of this country where people proudly call themselves coon asses, in Louisiana in particular. And I don't know too many people who younger than 40 who use that term as a racial slur. As far as the other word, goon, I've been informed by my 17-year-old daughter that among her peers is a term of endearment.
In almost every interview, Oliver has said he finds it unusual the police are so slow to release information.
There's a gap there still, even with all this other information about how the two met. There's still a gap that's missing that hasn't been released about how the gun went off. I don't understand why this information is taking so long to come out, given the past practices of Florida law enforcement in releasing information in a high-profile case.
Today, there was another rally in Sanford, Florida, and Martin's parents appeared at a city commission tonight. The overwhelming theme was people were asking, why hasn't there been an arrest in this case? Get your cell phones out. I want to know what you think. Tonight's question: will George Zimmerman's supporters be able to paint him as a victim? Text A for yes, text B for no to 622-639. And you can always go to our blog at ed.msnbc.com. We'll bring you the results later on in the show. I am joined tonight by Trumaine Lee, senior reporter of the Huffington Post, and also Walter Zalisco, president and CEO of Global Investigative Group and a retired police chief from Florida. Gentlemen, great to have you with us tonight. First of all, Trumaine, I understand that you have been with the family for most of the day. How are they responding to this leaked information, which obviously is trying to paint their son as some kind of a misfit?
The legal team had prepared the family for this. They said that as the case rolls along, there would inevitably be a pushback and some attempt to discredit their son. But I spoke with Tracy Martin, the father, this evening, and he said no matter what, they're committed to continue the fight because the whole world is watching. If they stop, then everyone else will stop. So they want to make sure that they're going to keep the wheels moving, regardless of what opposition they're confronted with.
And what was said at that commission meeting this evening?
Speaker after speaker, from Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee to Corinne Brown to the Reverends Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson, all implored this commission to either hold the police chief and the Sanford Police Department responsible and accountable for any missteps, but also, again, as we hear over and over again, the arrest of George Zimmerman. Be it the state police or the federal investigators, they want an arrest, and soon.
Mr. Zelisko, what do you make of the timing of the release of this information via a website when there's been so much media pressure over the last few weeks? Is this standard operating procedure?
No, I don't think it is. The information should have been revealed much earlier in this whole investigative process, and the fact that they're just releasing bits and pieces of the investigation is rather suspicious in itself. But we do realize that by Florida statute, and as well as some other states, the release of ongoing investigations is prohibited, and once they complete the investigation, then they'll be able to release the entire investigative reports. But there have been some issues with the initial investigation report and how the officers responded to the scene. Okay, well, what are they? What's the number one thing that jumps out at you as an investigator and a former police chief? Well, the first thing is they responded to the scene, and the first responding officer approaches Mr. Zimmerman. He sees Trayvon laying on the ground, and he approaches Mr. Zimmerman, and he asks him if he's seen the suspect or the subject. Mr. Zimmerman identifies himself, saying, "I'm the one that shot the individual." You would think that the officer would ask him why or what had occurred. Nowhere in his investigation report is there any mention as to if he asked him, why did you shoot him? What happened here? Nothing to that effect. And that is crucial evidence to any investigation. And I want to ask you about this police report. None of it matches up, at least from what I can see, none of it matches up with any of the 911 tape. And what about this piece of information where one of the witnesses who heard crying said that she called a detective repeatedly, but said he was not interested because her account differed from Zimmerman's? What do you make of that? Well, if there is any truth to that, I think it just reflects extremely poorly on the detective and the Sanford Police Department. I mean, here we have a homicide investigation. I don't think you can get any more serious of a crime than a homicide. And for them to just push this back and not return calls to a witness, and probably a key witness, is unquestionable. That is totally, incompetence, in the investigation. Trumaine, what was the family's reaction to the information that was released today?
I think the family all along kind of expected this to come, so they were indeed hurt, but they still had more questions. They said the thing that people should be focusing on is that their son was killed and he was unarmed. And also, I want to go back to those initial reports. On March 8th, I spoke with Chief Lee for about 10 to 15 minutes, and there was never any mention of any of this information. What he told me is that Zimmerman got out of his vehicle and followed Trayvon Martin, and at some point Martin turned around and asked him what he wanted. This is a complete shift from what I'm hearing now. But the family, again, all along suspected that at some point some of this information will come out.
Trumaine, did Police Chief Lee ever tell you that Zimmerman was handcuffed and that medics attended to him in a patrol car and he was bleeding? Did any of that, was that ever said to you as a reporter?
Never. Not once.
And Mr. Zelisko, what do you make of that? That's pretty vital information, isn't it? I mean, if a guy's bleeding, there's obviously some kind of confrontation. Well, that's the point I was trying to make. I mean, if the officer approached Zimmerman and he's bleeding from the back of his head and from his nose, a logical question is, what happened here? None of that was asked. The only thing that is reported is that Zimmerman is telling the EMTs that I was calling for help and nobody would respond. But we have to remember is that Zimmerman was not a suspect. The police could have questioned him at that point. You only have to invoke your constitutional rights once you become a suspect. So I don't understand why the police didn't question Zimmerman more. Well, at the scene, he was questioned later on in the police station, but I mean, you're right at the scene there. You get vital information at the initial point of the incident. Trumaine, another thing that bothers me about the police report, they knew who the slain victim was. They knew who Trayvon Martin was. It says how much he weighed, how tall he was. Well, obviously they must have had a driver's license or something. But there was no follow-up to find his parents anywhere. Why didn't they go door to door?
I think that's what has so many people confused and perplexed. Why not go door to door? They also had his cell phone. Why not call the last numbers he called? And there, for days on end, Trayvon Martin was supposedly listed as a John Doe. So it's the mounting questions that keep plaguing the family. And tonight at the city council hearing, they implored the commission, what would you want done if this was your child, if this was your son or daughter? And that's the part that I think, having spent some time with the family, that bothers them most. They don't have any answers, and it doesn't seem like anyone as of yet is pressuring the police department or those initial investigators as to why they allowed George Zimmerman to go home with the DNA evidence on his shirt, if there was blood, if there was any other evidence on his clothing. And so again, these questions are mounting, and this is really disturbing the family.
All right, one more thing I want to bring up with both of you is this Joe Oliver, who seems to be going out doing the media rounds. Trumaine, is he credible? Does he know Zimmerman, and what's the connection there?
I'll have to say, like so much in George Zimmerman's life, there's a fog here. So I have to admit, I don't know much about the connection between Mr. Oliver and Mr. Zimmerman at all, but it doesn't surprise me that none of us know much about him, because there's still this wall that I think we're all trying to break through. And as bits and pieces come out, we're learning more, but still, like so much in this case, more questions than answers.
And finally, Mr. Zalesko, does this police report today cloud the picture even more, or do you see anything being cleared up as a positive step towards justice?
Well, I think this whole investigation is cloudy right from the beginning. No matter what they put out now, is always going to have some question about the validity of it.
Is it a good old boy network at work?
Well, let's face it, Central Florida has a history of good old boys here, and, you would hate to see that this be the case here, but, it is what it is.
Trumaine Lee and Walter Zalesko, thanks for your time tonight. Appreciate it so much. Remember to answer tonight's question there at the bottom of the screen and share your thoughts on Twitter. We, of course, want to know what you think. Coming up, right-wingers are trying their best to demonize Trayvon Martin. Turner Clayton Jr. will be joining me later. He is the Seminole County NAACP. He will join me to talk about it. And years of right-wing attacks on health care reform have finally led to gone to the Supreme Court. 3 days of hearings kicked off today. Jonathan Cohn of the New Republic was in the chamber, and he will join me tonight. Stay with us. We're right back.